Okay. One more thing. Well, that link disappeared.
Sit. Coco, sit.
So the dog's name is Coco?
Coco and Dee.
Coco. I don't have anything for him.
He just wants a pet in the head. She'll take that. Do you think you're standing
So
still?
we're having technical differences?
No, everything works very well. It's just making everything set up and making sure everything is connected the right way. Just, I guess I move it somewhere. Yes.
Hello.
Okay, so let's make sure we can see.
Is this the first time? Yeah. That was like a code.
Can you see us?
Yeah, I could a minute ago. Yes, I can still.
Yes, great. Can you see us now?
Yep, still can.
Perfect.
Excellent.
So, we got the people here. First, let me say thank you. Okay, right, it's moving out. Thank you for taking your time.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Tell us if you are seeing us. If
That's
not,
better. That's
will
better.
be- And I can rotate the camera to pick up whoever will be speaking.
Okay.
So I'm Alec.
Hi, Alec.
Arlene.
On my right is Arlene. I don't know if he can see you, but you can.
Hi. I don't know if you can see me.
I can move it so you can see. So I'm here in the middle. You are not.
To the side, I can see Arlene, right?
Yes. So
Hi.
whoever wants to be in the picture, they can see. Caris.
It's fine. I'll have to be in the picture. Hello.
Hi, Clarice.
Helen, hi.
Hi there.
And Mike.
Mike.
Hi, Mike.
You can grab a chair. This is supposedly to be wide angle camera, but maybe it does not catch everybody.
Okay, people can move around.
And
Okay.
hi, Dan. And Robin, who's actually hosting us and providing internet.
Yes. Somebody else is actually doing the hosting of me. I'm just putting the space.
Okay.
Right, so joint operation.
Dee, come here.
Oh, we got your dogs.
So I wanted first to say, you know, that how we work is that this is very open discussion tab. We do not like set any strict rules, except we want to have the interesting conversation and
Okay.
tell us how much time you have, and we will work with that, and hopefully also get something out of it to learn maybe more what we found really interesting in your book or not.
Well, thanks. I have about half an hour or 40 minutes. I have to go a little bit before 5 my time. So it's a little bit before 8 your time I have to go. Sorry I don't have more.
Okay. So let me start by saying that I selected this book.
Well,
The
thanks.
reason I thought it was very interesting is that there are not that many books that go into like very short future, like 20 years. It's very difficult to write something that is not far, far away, or it is not just few years into future. And build something that looks like interesting vision, has some message. We can talk more about the message. And there is some like, I think you are trying to put maybe some warnings about, you wrote this book about like 3 or 4 years ago, right?
I started it like 3 or 4 years ago, yeah.
So that was before NSA and all that came out.
I wrote Nexus and Crux. I wrote the first 2 books before I'd ever heard of Edward Snowden. So when I was writing it, Homeland Security, as you see in the book, was who I was really, that was who I was mad at. And the NSA kind of barely crossed my radar, to be totally honest.
Okay. Did we lose voice?
Oh, I can hear you.
No. Okay. So the way I would like to go is to, we already introduced, but if you have any question to start, I want to make sure that anybody who wants to ask question, otherwise I will go and ask it. Arlene, do you have anything you want to say about the book in general, or the question?
Well, I really, really love the book. I do have a question. I think it's one of the ones, or related to one of the ones that that somebody put in. I didn't finish it in time to submit questions before, so I guess this is my question. Okay, so Nexus obviously has this amazing potential to transform human society in a very, very positive way. And, of course, extending into transhuman and posthuman. But there's obvious obstacles, being the current political systems of the world. And so I'm wondering how a positive vision can be achieved. I mean, I was thinking you need a change in consciousness to get beyond the current political and economic systems, which of course are intertwined. And Nexus would help that change of spiritual consciousness. So it's sort of like a chicken or the egg question. How do you get to the point where you can use Nexus in a positive way when you have these systems that exist at the present time?
Yeah.
How do you see that happening?
It's a good question. It's a big question. So in a certain way, Nexus to me is an allegory for all information technology. So I write this sci-fi stuff about neurotechnology in your brain, but in a certain sense, every other information technology we have kind of faces the same dynamics and has the same effects. So in the U.S., tolerance towards other races, other genders, other sexual orientations, all of those actually have gotten better and better and better continuously over the last 4 years. As we encounter more people who are more diverse and more different than us, because we live in cities, so we see them face to face, but we see them on television, we can communicate with them across the internet, and that bad things happen that way too, but the information tech already lets us sort of increase empathy in a way, or like increase our sense of tribe, at the same time that it also is often disliked by the powers that be. So I'm not sure that's really answering your question, but I feel like all of the magical powers that I ascribe to Nexus are magical powers of books and of spoken language as well. I mean, I just kind of like let us look at them freshly by ascribing them to technology we don't have yet. Does that make sense? Am I full of shit?
Unfortunately, you were cut off a little bit at a couple
Speaker.
points. You were cut off a little bit at a couple points. So are you saying that that the technological bases of Nexus already exist? Is that kind of, and the technological and maybe cultural bases of Nexus already exist?
No, I was saying that the cultural benefits of Nexus, many of them we already achieve via the internet, and we were already achieving to a limited extent via television and books for a long time. And so it's sort of on a continuum. That even before you get direct beaming of someone's thoughts into your head, that being able to read a book different than you, let you empathize with a person different than you. It's a very wishy-washy answer in a way, but like so this is, here's a strange answer maybe, but there was this scientific study that came out recently that said that if you watched a sitcom that had a gay character in the sitcom, your attitudes on gay marriage became more friendly. Even though gay characters on television have, until recently, have all been sort of terrible stereotypes. They're all comedic relief. They're never, you know, like all harmless, but they're all like, hello, I am the fashion designer or the wedding planner. It's all very stereotyped. But even so, that has had a positive effect on society because now you're like, oh, that person is not a threat to me. It's okay. And so that's what I'm trying to say is that indirectly, every other communication technology has actually allowed us to empathize with more people and has given society more ability to achieve the things that I have Watts dreaming about Nexus allowing us to achieve.
Okay.
Maybe.
I'm jumping in late. Hi, I'm Danielle.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi, Danielle.
Can I just have follow-up?
Ramez, if you cannot hear her, just let us know.
Okay.
You might
Just in case this microphone.
Danielle, so I can hear you.
So I'm not sure if this question was asked because it's related to what you were just speaking about, so it might have been connected to what I'm about to ask. But I was wondering why the technology developed in the Nexus and that Watts was really poor and Cage was really poor. I thought it would be beneficial. Why did it have the coercion piece connected to it? Because I thought the thing that made it positive was the empathy factor, the mind meld factor, which you could do without the elements of body control and mind control. And so that is what, for me, like in reading it, that was right away. They actually mentioned the Borg earlier, earlier in the book. I'm like, don't they know Star Trek, the Borg? The cruise ships is like, who's going to control that? And people, at something than others. So I was just wondering why you took that avenue with Nexus to have that really strong element as well, as opposed to seeing what would happen with something that was strictly about empathy, reading minds, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. I did it for two reasons. So number one is that anything from a science standpoint, it seemed to me that just the way I imagined it was anything that could just directly input data and export data from your neurons would allow all sorts of things, mind control being one of them. But the bigger reason actually was it seems to me that every technology we've ever created has had both positive uses and negative uses. Almost every technology. And so I kind of wanted to write about that. You know, what do you do when the internet and computers are overwhelmingly positive? Like, I think we hopefully we all agree that, like, overall, like, computing technology is way positive. But, you know, child porn exists and spreads more because of it, and Al-Qaeda can coordinate their activities because of it, and the NSA can read all of our emails because of it. So there's downsides too. So that to me, like, was more interesting to get into. Like, what do you do when something is like 85% positive, but there's this downside? Or more realistically, what do you do when there's this thing that has all these positive applications and these negative possibilities, and there's an argument between people who say, no, the negative is going to be the big thing, and people who say, no, the positive is going to be the big thing. And, you know, it's almost like a question about human nature. Like, if you give, are they going to use it mostly? Are they going to self-manage themselves? Are they going to use it mostly for good things or for bad things? So that was like a more pithy question for me to get into. That's where I wanted to go, anyway. And I'm still not sure I was very convincing, actually. I think if you start reading the books agreeing with me, I think most people are on my side who read the books already. So I think for those people, it's pretty satisfying. But I'm actually not sure if I convince anybody who doesn't start the books already agreeing with me. So I don't know.
Yeah, I found it interesting. I think, you know, I understood, you know, even from people wanting to reconstruct, you know, the plague and different things, that you just shouldn't touch this because you can. So I understood the premise and that the fact that that's human nature also. And but I just, me personally, the idea of it, it was a no-no for me. I would never submit to, because of the possibility of being hacked, even if it wasn't designed automatically within Nexus as it was. You know, you just open the door to so much, and I value choice, what it is. You know, there's a lot of debate whether you actually have choice, but I still have that illusion of control over myself, and I want to keep that.
So, can't we still be hacked? Or, I mean, some evil, charismatic politician comes and sweeps a country into violence and despair. Isn't that, in effect, it's hacking your brain at the same time, hacking the brain of society, you know?
They are saying that you do not need advanced technology to
I'm saying
hack
we already have direct mind communication with each other. It just happens to be through the same channel. And
maybe not direct, but close enough.
Yeah, but I can.
You can guard, why couldn't you guard yourself consistently? I mean, people were talking about, you know, the dangers of computer viruses, and yeah, there's lots of them out there, but when's the last time one really crashed your system? Once or twice, and then you fixed it? You know, the idea that it's impossible to fix these problems, or these problems are impossible to guard against, I don't necessarily agree with.
It's the level of trust you have to have with people fixing it, because that's something integral. Your mind is integral in your body. And I personally don't have the expertise in that area, so you're just, you need a level of trust beyond what I have.
But you could be better. You could download the software that will improve your mind.
I mean, I can definitely see a distinction between some fascistic dictator controlling people externally and something that's in your mind. I mean, I think you did a really good job of showing both the extraordinarily positive potential and the extraordinarily positive negative potential of something like Nexus.
Well, thank you.
Well, something I'm really curious about, and kind of going off the theme of control, you know, I've spent a lot of time in my own life meditating and studying various spiritualities, and so I found that very interesting. So much in, you know, Buddhist philosophy and these sort of Enlightenment spiritualities is this idea of you know, giving up the sense of duality. and achieving a oneness both with others and with all of existence. And I was curious whether this was something that you studied yourself, something you believe in, because there was so much influence on it, at least with the monks, and that sort of really kind of, I want to say, even though this is not something that one, at least any of us in this room, I'm sure, have experienced, it felt very authentic, this sense of oneness and this kind of communal consciousness that they achieved, and I was curious what your inspiration was for that.
Thanks. I'm a lapsed meditator. I used to meditate a lot. I've done like a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and I, for a while, was a daily, like twice-a-day meditator in a Buddhist style. I'm not a Buddhist myself, but if I was going to be religious, Buddhism is the one that I like the most. But I've kind of just fallen out of the habit of it. But it made a big impact on me, and I consider it just sort of a tool that I still have, I guess, though I don't pull it out very often. I wish I did, actually, and I keep saying I'm going to start doing that again, but I haven't yet.
And does anybody mind if I ask another question?
Go ahead.
Something else I was curious about. I recently, for the first time, read Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the really interesting concepts that he had was this idea of language as a virus. And I felt like there were some similar themes of the way that information propagates. That you sort of proposed, especially that part at the end where the Nexus 3 recipe and the Nexus 5 upgrade information just basically goes viral. And so I was curious if there was any inspiration there, or did you come to that independently?
Well, I read Snow Crash a long time ago, either in high school or college, and I loved that book. It might still be my favorite Stevenson book, actually, or favorite or second favorite. I worked in software for a long time, so it might have unconsciously influenced me. Snow Crash is actually an intentional influence in that I thought. One of the things I loved about Snow Crash was that the first chapter was just hilarious. I don't think Nexus is a very funny book, but I tried to insert some levity in the beginning. I would probably write the first chapter differently in Nexus, honestly, because it's offensive to some people, and I didn't mean it to be offensive. But any attempts at humor probably owe themselves a little bit to having read Snow Crash. But I'm sure that Stevenson has rubbed off on me in various ways.
Cool. On the topic of, I noticed one of the things that struck me about the book was actually not the book itself, but the speaker.
I can hear you.
Your comments at the end about collaboration and how many people had helped out with the creation of this book.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I noticed that we certainly knew things about programming and programming on large-scale software, which is another collaborative enterprise.
Yeah.
And when I think of, I myself am a programmer, I think about how programs are written. You describe it a bit in when they're building the backdoor into the compiler early in the book. There's this process of, you collectively prioritize things, people work on the most important things, and then you sort of back off to more and more detailed work as you go on. And that's not sort of my impression of how novels are written. And I'm wondering if there's a reason for that difference, and if that's something that could change.
So Nexus was definitely, it was not a collaborative process exactly, but Nexus is a book written by one person, but where I had a very large number of very kind beta readers who read the book, provided a ton of feedback, kept me from feeling so lonely and isolated, because I hear writing is a very solitary job, but it's not for me. And I think it's less solitary in the modern age than it used to be. Nowadays, all of us writers, we know each other and we're on Twitter and Facebook all day, talking to each other, kind of snarking and whatever. We have to actually shut off Facebook and Twitter to get our job done. Otherwise, we'd just be gossiping with other writers all day long. Is how I feel anyway. But leaving that aside, beta readers are invaluable to me just because they give me feedback. I have a lot of sessions like this in person with my readers who have gone through the book. They read the book. They mark it up. I leave them, when I give them a draft, there's questions at the beginning and end of what I want from them. You guys still hear me? So they tell me what they thought, and then we sit down and discuss. But that's very different from co-writing a book. Co-writing a book is something I don't know how to do, actually. I know people who have other situations where it's not just two people writing a book or writing a story, but where it's a team. So if you look at how TV shows are written, where there's a showrunner, and there might be 5 or 6 writers who work on scripts for different episodes in a TV show, that is much more of a collaborative process. Or same thing with a comic book series or a comic book universe. Like you look at like what DC or Marvel do. The job of editors there often is to make sure that characters and sort of meta stories can comic book titles, and there it's something probably more like group software writing. We really have to have each writer is kind of an individual engineer engineering their story, but they have to do things like hand off characters from one place to another. So my friend Daniel Wilson, he wrote Apocalypse. He lives in Portland, so he's not very far from me. He's a buddy. He is now editing or sort of writing a comic book series for DC, and he's leading a team of 3 or 4 writers. He's describing this process to me, and that's more like software development. We have to sort of manage this team of 3 or 4 writers, and they have to hand off characters back and forth, and even they have to interface with other teams of writers who are handling different series over here. So for me.
I was just wondering more about the technology of the actual hardware involved. I remember I went to a talk and they were speaking about nanomedicine and using it to target cancers, etc. But I guess the scale of how small it would have to be to actually interface with your neurons, and then also how far are we from technology like that, and then also just the meld scene. I was wondering just the mechanism of that, because when Sam was trying to hide who she was, I was automatically thinking, that the memory is still there physically in her brain, so won't they be able to tell? Won't the software, the hardware, have access to that and know that there's, she's actively blocking access from memories for that sector? And so won't they automatically know something is wrong? And then, the memories did start coming out, but I was wondering just about, it seemed like it came naturally because she was very involved in it, and I was wondering if she was still able to maintain control, would they be able to know anyway because of how the system works, the hardware, the software interaction, and how the brain works?
That's a set of really, really good questions. So the Nexus, nothing like the Nexus hardware exists today, and I don't think it will exist by 2040. So right now, the most cutting-edge brain-computer interfaces involve cutting a hole in your skull and that punch into your neurons. And that's not anything that any of us is really excited about doing voluntarily. And those systems, with Nexus, we're talking about billions of these things, or hundreds of millions in your brain. The best systems today are maybe 200 electrodes. Okay? There are some proposals for things to get closer to Nexus. There's a proposal out there for something called neural dust, where they'd sprinkle tens of thousands of tiny chips in your brain. There's another proposal where they would use carbon nanotubes, and they'd actually come in through your veins, actually through your thigh, and they'd put maybe 1 million of these things in that would spread out like a flower inside of your brain. So people are kind of talking about, on paper ideas that get closer to Nexus, but still just kind of, they haven't even done them in animals. They're like saying, here's an idea that's something that might work, give us a grant, and we want to try it out in animals. The other question about Sam, there are cases of, in humans, people have just forgotten who they are, and people have been, in some cases, almost brainwashed into having a false set of memories. So memory is very malleable. It sure can be. Now, what would happen if we inserted a brain-computer interface into someone like that and tried to look at what their memories were? I really have no idea. But sort of the implication in that scene is the reason that Sam does snap out of it is because of the Nexus. Is that the Nexus, by connecting a bunch of memories that normally the hypnosis that she's in would be hiding from her, the Nexus is wiring up those memories that would be hidden from her because it's kind of cross-linking them to the thoughts of other people around her, and then cognitive dissonance going on, and that's kind of something that snaps her out of this whole hypnotic trance that she's in. But I just kind of made that up. I was just kind of guessing what would happen, and we don't really have any idea at this point.
I just, that kind of makes sense because, like, there isn't one place in our brain where memories are. Sights, smells trigger memories. So the fact that she's connected to all these other minds, and she's seeing what they're seeing, she's remembering what they're remembering. Those are all triggers for memories too.
That's right. It's all in the cross-linking.
Let me ask, what was the biggest mystery in Nexus Connected? Can you explain what is it? What's on the cover?
You guys can't. You didn't figure it out? Well, look at the back. Look at the back of the book, and then flip it around to the front. I love the cover, but I guess you guys didn't. So we're going to do a new cover. That is a blister pack. It's a blister pack of pills.
Oh, okay.
And see, one of the blister packs is popped. I know Nexus is a vial, it's a liquid. The new cover is not going to do any better. But it's a blister pack of pills. And in one of the pills is a human with, like, Wi-Fi coming out of his head. It was artistic license. I thought it was lovely, but in the Polish edition, I might have the Polish.
Did you design it?
No, I don't design these things. The publisher has someone do that. Originally, they wanted it to be embossed, so you would physically feel it. That it would have like a physical lip when you put your fingers over it. But I think that cost like 7 cents more per book or something. So they didn't. Yeah, the company that bought the rights in Poland did that. So the Polish edition is actually much nicer. So if any of you read Polish, you can buy that one.
I am from Poland.
How many languages is the book in?
I think we've sold 6 or 7 translations. Polish, Russian, French, Turkish, Cypriot. I didn't even know. I mean, I guess in Cyprus they must speak something. So Cypriot. We're about to sell Spanish, and I think we're talking about Portuguese, something else. No Chinese, though. I really want to sell Chinese and Japanese. I want to sell Chinese. because I'm almost certain.
Evil government in China.
I'm almost certain that the third book will be banned completely in China. So I want to sell the first book there so we can get some press when they ban the third book. But but no dice so far.
Actually, talking about the biz, I apologize. This is kind of like a selfish question, I guess. I have my first sci-fi book coming out next month, and
Okay.
I was curious if you have any advice on promotion or, kind of getting the work out there.
I have a ton of advice. Drop me an email.
I would love to.
My email is easy to find on my website. It's on my about page or something like that.
Okay,
Or
great. Thank you.
When is your third book coming out? Your third fiction book, I should say, coming out.
Apex is what it's called. End of October.
Okay.
So there will be happy end, right?
Pardon?
Happy end?
Happy end.
Oh, well, I'm sure someone will be happy. My girlfriend is happy that I handed it into the publisher, and now I can actually hang out with her. So.
I think that's one of the most important. I was just thinking about some of the themes in the book, and then toward the end, I think her name was Ling, the little girl, and
Yes.
the fact that she didn't really see herself as human. So, to me, I guess the question came, what is human? Being able to access, from the time you're small, all this information, etc. And so having more knowledge, does that make you not human because you're more intelligent, you have more connectivity, and then what is it that makes you human? Because I guess going back to my first question, one of the biggest things I was struggling over is that the idea that increased intelligence will lead to better things, where I feel that that's not necessarily the missing aspect for a lot of our problems. We have lots of smart people, involved in finance, etc., in fields that are not improving humanity.
Yep.
It's intelligence is the problem. It's the desire to work in these fields that would improve some of our problems. So, and this is a convoluted question, but I guess it goes back to Ling just in terms of, in her viewpoint of not being human because of her thoughts are different, her mental environment is different, where
Yeah.
that from it, why you felt she would feel that way.
Well, so I personally, I have a very expansive view of what human means. So I think that the idea that you stop being human at some point by upgrading yourself is really profoundly silly, personally. But a lot of the book is about this idea of who gets to decide where human is, and the different people will have different ideas. And I know people right now who are what they call themselves transhuman separatists. So they want to upgrade themselves. They're delusional, I think. They want to upgrade themselves and splinter themselves from the rest of humanity and call themselves transhumans and just think of everybody else as just a human. I think they're wackos, actually. So I wanted to reflect the idea that just as people in the government wanted to classify these people as not being human in a bad way, Ling wanted to view herself as not being human in a good way. And that people will form their identities in different ways, and everyone will have a different view of what it means, what the word human even means, and a different connotation of is it a positive or negative thing to not be human. And Cade is on the side of everybody is part of this thing called humanity, and Su Young is definitely on the side of no, look, there is a splintering, and the post-humans are definitely better than the humans, and there's going to be conflict, and she's clearly passed that on to Ling. And the government is on the side of the post-humans are a threat to humanity. In a certain sense, the government has the same views as Su Young, or similar views, but this is like, what we are the other side, so we just squash you. And then you'll see, if you guys read Crux, you'll see it just gets amped up, another notch in the dial.
Okay, I have to read book 2.
And I'll warn you that book 2 is the Empire Strikes Back of the series, meaning that it gets darker than Nexus. And then book 3 is sort of like the Return of the Jedi, except that there's no Ewoks.
So, on that topic, I was kind of surprised at the amount of violence in the book, and I was wondering if that was just because you wanted to write an action story, or if you actually think that is the most plausible response to a technology like this coming out.
I think there were 3 separate things. I think one, I wanted to write an action story, and a part of that is that as a new author, I was very conscious of the fact that I'm a new author and that I didn't think that I had permission from the reader to let the story slow down. I really felt like, because they didn't know me, that it was incumbent on me to make the book very hard to put down. And I think that if you've read several of my books before, that's kind of more like, okay, I'll trust the reader to let it have a slow build. And really sort of, in Crux it's also very fast. In Apex, in the 3rd book, honestly the first half builds more slowly, because I feel like if you're reading the 3rd book, you're kind of invested. Number 2 is probably, I have a higher tolerance for action and violence than most people, for whatever reason, and that's something that I've learned about myself, that I should make the book less violent, because if it's, by the time it's crossing my threshold, it's probably beyond the people's. But number 3 is something that's important to me, which is that I feel that in general, in media and stories and books and movies, we have this notion that things happen and that there's no consequences. And if you'll notice, something that happens in Nexus is it's not just that violence happens, it's that there's violence and there's consequences. Like, violence happens and characters walk out scarred, or people die. Characters walk out scarred physically and psychologically. Because that, like, in action movies, like, bad things happen and the characters just walk away into the sunset. And I just didn't want to let that happen. And also, I also feel strongly that when certain policies, it affects people's lives. People go to prison for a long time. People die in police raids. So I felt like it would be not realistic to not show that in some way. Okay, I have to go soon, but I can't let that be the last question, because that was kind of depressing. So
you're going to kill everybody, right?
The end of Apex is the aliens come and blow the whole planet.
Did you plan to well, just talking about consequences, I thought it was really cool how Watts's death kind of reverberates through the ages, at least for him, that he's, he thinks he'll be born as a child in a Russian gulag or something because of what he's done in this life. But did you plan to kill off his character from the very beginning, or was that something that emerged through the writing?
He was conceived of as a tragic character from the very beginning.
Somebody asked, somebody submitted this question, maybe Carice, I'm not sure, ahead of time, asking about Watts's race and, why, how relevant that was. And, I'm not sure, I don't remember the exact question, but it was a question about how his race fits into it, and I'm curious about that too.
Wow. I'm glad that there was a person of color in the story who was an important character who has a key role to play. I wish I did not have the black guy dies first, sort of as the thing that happens in the story, to be totally honest.
I I have a question about surveillance. I mean, there's really no privacy, in Nexus. Do you think that's our future? With or without Nexus, that we have no privacy.
Well,
You have no privacy. You can't even throw a punch on the street. On YouTube. I feel like everywhere I go, I'm being watched.
Right, and there's cameras all over New York City. Right, but I want to know his. I mean, I think it's to a greater. I mean, maybe it's a quantitative difference, but I think it's quantitatively worse in Nexus.
Well, I think maybe we'll take this as the last question. So A, with Nexus, I think people would not adopt a technology like Nexus unless it let them not to. So you won't. It's like Facebook. You wouldn't actually use Facebook if it just posted everything that you ever typed to your Facebook wall, right? You actually, even if you do overshare on Facebook, which many of us probably do, you still like gives you at least some modicum of control. So Nexus as a technology has some. In the bigger sense of what's happening in society right now and privacy. Oh, sorry, something just. Sorry about that. I appear to have accidentally called somebody.
They want to stop you.
I think that was the NSA. The NSA apparently is listening. Unusually, they told me. So I think what happens is there's a pendulum swing. Okay, there's when people feel frightened, when people feel threatened, they tend to favor strong leaders, centralized control, and they're willing to trade their privacy and their freedoms away in exchange for the promise of security, whether it works or not. Then as people start trying to get their freedoms back. And privacy is just one type of freedom, and privacy is actually pretty abstract. In terms of types of freedoms, privacy is pretty far down the road. Like freedom to walk someplace, freedom to say what you want, like freedom of speech is far more immediate to people than privacy is. But we see the pendulum starting to swing back right now, I think. So I think the NSA is only part of the privacy story, actually. There's a lot more going on with actually like local cops and the FBI are probably a bigger issue with privacy than the NSA is. But the NSA is probably far more constrained right now than it has been in any point in the last 13 years, just because of the public pressure on them. The House is going to pass a bill, most likely, in the next 2 weeks that is going to limit the NSA. It's not as strong a bill. It's been watered down already in some ways. We haven't even seen the bill that's come out of committee. It's gotten watered down some more. But it's still going to be more constraint on them than I thought was going to pass the House even a month ago. The places that host your email, if you're on Gmail, Google is so pissed off at the NSA that they have now encrypted everything end-to-end between all their data centers to stop the NSA from just hacking them. A case on some of the things the NSA has been doing. One federal judge has said, it's probably okay. Another federal judge has said it's blatantly unconstitutional, and it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and we'll see what happens there. So a pendulum swings, and it swung all the way to who cares about privacy? We've got to stop another 9/11, and now it's going back to, well, maybe we've gone too far. And so we'll just see. And a lot of it depends upon how vulnerable do Americans feel. Because if it turns out that there's another terrorist attack and we feel really vulnerable, then the pendulum will swing back to who cares about privacy? Keep us safe at all costs. If nothing really happens for another several years, we will keep swinging back. Or if it comes out that there's more evidence of abuse of surveillance data, we will keep swinging back and forth towards more privacy. So I'm optimistic that we will win back a bunch of our privacies. But it will be a different balance than has ever been before. The future is not going to look like the past. In the past, to spy on someone, you had to actually put a human outside their door, or you had to actually break into their home to plant a bug. That has changed. Making more scalable. You can now just push some buttons and spy on someone. So the way that we deal with surveillance is going to be sort of implemented in different places. We implement it in the law, we implement it in checks and balances, we implement it in cryptography. And so the way that we can preserve our privacies is going to look very different in the future than it did in the past. But even so, I'm optimistic that it's going to be better next year than it was 2 years ago. So I've got to run, you guys, but thank you very, very much for having me, and thank you for the great questions. And feel free to get in touch. You can follow me on Twitter or friend me on Facebook or whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Good work.